Cyprus, the Counterintelligence podcast, hosted by IXN Solutions, the company you turn to for corporate counterintelligence expertise and creators of 351X.
Ryan, Rambo, we're live. Good morning. And what a different way to get after it, I said, good morning.
Yes, good morning.
How are you doing?
We are doing well. Normally we don't do podcasts in the morning, but this is a bit of a different deal that we're about to do. It's no guest. It's just me and you. And yeah, I think we're onto something pretty exciting right now. So what do you have in mind?
Yeah, so I'm really excited about this. It was probably about 2 or 3 weeks ago. I'd received some feedback from one, shout out, Rebecca Maxey. And she had said, your language, everything's great. Everything we're doing up to these episodes has been fantastic. It's insightful. But she mentioned one thing I didn't think about. We speak a very unique language. So when we say CI, counterintelligence, when we say tradecraft, what does that mean? When we say investigations, operations, all these things, all these terms that we're throwing out there, she had recommended, why don't you start with, as Socrates would say, wisdom begins with definition of terms. So in our series, which you can talk about here in a minute, we're going to start just there. A basic understanding of what counterintelligence is for our audience.
And I love that so much because defining the term counterintelligence, it means something different to everybody. And there's multiple definitions floating around. And it is a hard discipline to wrap your brain around because there's so much involved with it. I mean, just think about it. In the previous 8 or 9 episodes, I mean, we've talked to OSINT analysts, we've talked to counterintelligence professionals, facility security officers, cybersecurity professionals. I mean, think about all of the different categories that we ball into or roll up into a counterintelligence program. So to define that in a series of, maybe a sentence or 2 sentences, very, very complicated. And I can't wait to dig into this so that we can set the foundation for a much deeper conversation as time goes by.
Yeah, and it's been fun spitballing with you, Ryan, to be honest, kind of brought the idea to fruition based on what do you think about doing something like this? And you're like, why don't we blow it out? Let's do this over the series of 9 different episodes and really kind of unfold what counterintelligence is, start there, and then work our way through to how technology is going to impact protecting equity out there for corporate or the government entities.
Yeah, whenever we first started talking about it, you had a really aggressive schedule. And I thought, good Lord, we can't cover all of that in one episode. It's true. I'm about to get into master's level course material for the counterintelligence field. And who better to talk about it than me and you? We've got a couple of guys that have been around for a long time. Not that we know everything. I would never argue that, but we've seen counterintelligence once or twice in our life.
Yeah, that's right. Ryan's cat is making some noise for our audience out there. I love it. That's not getting cut out, by the way.
My cat just came in here and started going nuts. So sorry.
Too funny. But you're right. This won't be an all-encompassing. I think we'll probably keep it at the maybe 101 type of level. For our audience who are, master professionals of counterintelligence, don't beat us up too much. If you have recommendations or want to get on board with us to do a podcast, we'd love to bring you on board. But I think starting at that fundamental, 101 type of discussion, and maybe starting off, Ryan, was what is counterintelligence?
Oh, that's a great one. So, yeah, tons of history, right? So I was just going back through my library and pulling books on counterintelligence that were specifically written about counterintelligence. And so the first one I pulled up was Wilderness of Mirrors. And I'm not sure if you're
good one. Yes.
Really, really great book that dives back into the Angleton era, talks about Kim Philby. So solid book. There's no definition of counterintelligence in this book whatsoever. So then I pulled up another one, To Catch a Spy by James M. Olson. Great book. It is
a good book.
Wonderful book on counterintelligence. Can't find a definition in it about counterintelligence. So you have to read the whole book to get an understanding. Or if there is, James, please come on and let us know that I'm wrong. But I couldn't find the definition in that book. And then I pulled up this book. It's very controversial, by the way, written by a guy named Robert Baer, and it's called The Fourth Mole. And you and I, back whenever we were going through AppCitic and GCETA courses, they talked about the fourth mole theory. I'm not going to dive into it, but he had a definition, and I think it's probably the cleanest definition I've ever heard. And here's how he defines it. In chapter 1 at the top, he sets the scene and says, counterintelligence, the practice of keeping enemies outside your walls and catching the ones inside. I thought
that's it right there.
That's brilliant. It doesn't
matter. That is brilliant.
It is. And so that's the definition that I use normally when I try to define counterintelligence. Now, do you have a different definition of it?
Man, I don't know if I could have said it much better. That was pretty awesome, right? Who's inside the walls? I'm really, I'll go out on a limb and use my own terms on this. Great job of referencing the book. So there's several I think of when I'm thinking about counterintelligence. Number one, the double cross system. It lays out the 10 objectives of an offensive approach to get after it. But you can go all the way in through like Operation Solo, the Mole. There's a whole bunch of books out there. But you're right, nobody really defines what counterintelligence is. So in my words, I think it's activities and measures taken to protect against espionage, sabotage, and subversion. I'd love to talk with you about those three things, and then probably throw in other intelligence activities as well. But really, activities to protect people, infrastructure, or technology. I would consider that to be kind of counterintelligence, as we don't look outside the wire, but internally. How high is the fence? What is it made of? And who is operating inside? Who from the outside is trying to penetrate that wall or that fence to get internal looks on what's happening?
That's a great definition. And I agree with you. A lot of times in today's environment, we spend a great deal of time on information security, protecting proprietary information, national secrets. But counterintelligence also includes people. I mean, we obviously have to protect our most critical resource, and that's humans and employees. And then also the facilities. And a lot of times we kind of gloss over that and we go straight to the information security side of the house because that's the sexy stuff. That's espionage. We love that. So, but it's deeper. It involves a lot more.
I agree. And, I think when I think counterintelligence, if you asked me 20 years ago, what is counterintelligence? What's the number one thing people think about? It's espionage. It's that human factor. It's those covertly gathering information by an entity outside of whatever corporate entity that is, or government, a foreign intelligence adversary, or somebody trying to collect covertly using a human. That's what I would think of when I thought counterintelligence back in the day. And, espionage, it is counterintelligence to a T. People try to rip off proprietary information, technology. They use people to get inside the wire. So when I think counterintelligence, it's really synonymous with espionage.
Yeah, I agree. And espionage, as we always say in here, is the second oldest profession in the history of the world. People have been, as a matter of fact, even as young kids, I mean, we learn how to use the basic forms of espionage. It's, hey, Jeremy, can you find out if Sally Sue likes me or not?
That's
You
right.
find out. So we do it instinctively, naturally. We try to create that separation between us and the target. Oh my God, this cat is driving me crazy.
Yeah, that espionage factor, really, it's gaining an advantage in some capacity on your competitor or a foreign government. When I think about espionage, it ties back to the second oldest profession, betraying your company, betraying your country. So like the Rosenbergs in the 1950s, I mean, really taking a really big case, bringing it down to the bolts. They were trying to rip off the atomic secrets and sell them to the Soviet Union so they can gain an advantage and compete and outcompete what we were doing in the U.S.
For sure. And we've seen it all throughout the history of our country. I mean, even there's a great series out called Turn, and it goes back to the Washington Revolutionary era and George Washington's use of spies throughout the Revolutionary War. And I'm sure if we dug a little bit deeper, we would find espionage in the medieval era. We would find it in the biblical era. I mean, so it's been around forever and ever, and it still uses a lot of the same techniques. And uh, just yesterday, we were mentioning that honeypot,
That's right.
believe it or not, the honeypot still works. And a honeypot, if you want to define that, Jeremy, I'll let you take a stab at defining it.
Yeah, too funny, right? So, again, the second oldest profession makes the first oldest profession out there. Let's use espionage as a way to make individuals out there do things for pretty looking people. So if you're a male and you're a 5 and a female hits you and she's a 10 or a 30, hey, take a look at that. And then conversely, females out there, if you're a 5 and a male comes up that's a 10 or a 30, you might want to take a look. What's really happening here, especially if they have a foreign accent? It reminds me of the Marine case that happened, and he met Uncle Sasha. So it's a very attractive female. He was working I believe the security desk in one of the embassies. I believe it was Moscow. I'll have to, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, Ryan. He was overseas and he started dating this female. She's very attractive. And all of a sudden, I want to introduce you to my uncle, Uncle Sasha. Uncle Sasha was a KGB agent.
Yeah, and it's funny that you mentioned that case because in 2014 or 2015, in the Midwest here in the United States, had a very similar case. It didn't involve Russia, but it involved another country from the Big Four, and same kind of thing. Guy meets girl. He's a 3, she's a 10. It wasn't true love, even though he thought it was. And next thing you know, she's introducing him to their version of Uncle Sasha. And so still works today. So,
It does. And I think we can look back just a couple of years ago up in New York City with Anna Chapman, right? And her ability to influence men in the political circles around the government and the federal, state, and local government up in New York City. So tried or true, still works, honeypots. Crazy.
it is crazy. Well, we kind of went off track on the
Yeah,
honey.
sorry.
That's my bad. But I think we probably continue with some definitions. And
That's
so
right.
we continue to talk about the term espionage. And just wondering if you had off the cuff, I'm going to put a little bit of pressure on you, a definition of espionage. What does that mean in both the government environment and maybe even the commercial corporate environment?
Yeah, I think it comes to one term, betrayal. Betrayal, if you're in a corporate entity and you work for a big tech company out there, the other tech companies out there want to gain an advantage, so it affects their bottom line. What they're going to try to do in espionage, try to recruit somebody clandestinely to get in your organization, somebody that's already there, to give up whatever proprietary technology or information you have to make that other company better, faster, and stronger. And with the government, I mean, if you look at anybody in the military, they raised their right hand. They swore an oath to protect and defend the U.S. against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And what oftentimes espionage cases that are out there, a foreign country convinces through one of 4 motivations, real common motivations. There's a lot more than that. One of those 4 common motivations to betray their country, so it would further the other country. How's that, Ryan?
Yeah, I loved it. I mean, because a person to be in a position to commit espionage has to first be in a position of trust. And they have to be trusted in the organization and have access to secrets, regardless of what those secrets are. And then it's that person using or betraying that trust that's been given to them, extended to them by whatever that overarching entity is. So whether it's a corporation or government entity, and a person using that trust to collect and gather information and then hand it off to some foreign adversary. Now, the word foreign, which is typically related to counterintelligence, I think probably needs to be defined as well. So for me, I posted something on LinkedIn, believe it or not. I know that's a crazy concept, but I posted it on LinkedIn and I tried to define foreign from a corporate standpoint. And I had a counterintelligence professional passionately attack me on LinkedIn. And
What?
yeah, he said, foreign counterintelligence can only be used against other nation states or anything external to the United States, whether it's terrorist organizations, whatever else, that you cannot have counterintelligence in a corporate environment because it's only specifically designed against other nation states, which, I mean, if we were in the same room together, he'd have probably tried to put me in a headlock. That's how pissed off.
Wow.
But it was a really passionate debate. So I think finding foreign might be important for us as we go through the basics elements of counterintelligence. So what do you have?
Yeah, you're spot on, man. In my professional opinion, a foreign entity is not just a foreign government, it's a foreign company or a company that maybe is just outside of what that company is doing. And I'll use an example, Microsoft and Apple, if you will, right? Microsoft wants to know what Apple's doing, and Apple most certainly wants to know what Microsoft's doing. That's a counterintelligence threat, plain and simple. They're trying to collect information to give them an operational advantage or gain advantage over the other company. The same principles apply out there. So I'd have to look through your LinkedIn feed on that, Ryan, because I agree with you. Foreign doesn't necessarily mean, to me, a foreign government. Counterintelligence, the principles, whether you call it counterintelligence, insider threat protection, risk management, risk reduction, those principles are counterintelligence, to be honest. You're protecting your fence and what's inside of it.
And I agree. And we see this historically in the corporate environment. Hershey versus Mars. God, I read a fantastic book that they've been trying to steal each other's secrets for decades, just to get an economic advantage. I mean, how can you make chocolate any different? So, but running battle for decades. Same thing with Coke and Pepsi. Coke and Pepsi have always tried to one up each other in the soft drink space. And there's some pretty gnarly espionage cases related to that. So I agree with you. It doesn't necessarily have to be a nation state, but I can't wait for this podcast to go out because somebody's going to come up and argue that point. So, and we should have that argument. We should have that debate.
Yeah, it'd be nice to have a healthy discussion on that. So if you're out there and you disagree with Ryan and I, please let's connect and let's get you on board and let's just have a good conversation about it. Before we move on, and I got two more things, Ryan. One real quick: spies on the sideline. Right there, plain and simple. The NFL.
Yeah.
Look at what just happened with Kansas City and the Eagles. Not that probably nothing nefarious happened, but a team is going to try to gain an advantage over another team so they get that Super Bowl ring. Take a look at that book. It's pretty good. I know you recommended it to me. Same principles apply.
Oh, gotcha. And it's not just the NFL, it's college football. It's baseball.
That's right.
Astros several years ago were trying to steal signs. If you take a look at college football these days, the coaches stand behind a banner that two team managers now hold up to block what the coach is signaling out to the players. It is espionage happens everywhere. It is the way that nefarious people try to gain an advantage, and it's not going away.
I think it's so. I mean, you've said it several times. I've said it. 2025 is the year of counterintelligence. Protect your stuff out there. Now, before we move on, and I want to ask you about sabotage, but before I do that, when you think about motivations of why people commit espionage against either their corporate entity or against the government, why do you think they do that, Ryan? What are those motivations?
I think, the base motivation for me is money. People commit espionage for money. And now it's arguable because I would talk to people like Jim Lawler, and he said that he would never recruit a spy whose sole foundational motivation was money. It's just not worth it to him. But I think the big one is money. If we take a look at Robert Hanssen and Aldrich Ames and some of the historical spies, money was their motivation. Now I think ideology is a close second. And
Yeah.
we see that a lot, in like dictatorships and, failed government systems, where people have an axe to grind against the system. Now, saying that, can that not be done in the United States? Obviously, it can. I mean, we've seen that from cases like Snowden, Reality Winner, people that disagreed with the politics of the day and had an axe to grind. So it can happen in all systems. I just think it's a little bit rarer in a democratic society. Um, Third and fourth one, I think the excitement of it all. I think that number three might be just it's exciting. I want to live on the edge a little bit of adventure, spice things up a little bit. And so maybe that would be a third one. And then the fourth one, I really can't think of the fourth one. So I'm going to let you school me, educate me on what are the four.
That was really good. Money, I agree with you, is number one to me. And I think what you're trying to allude to was, what is it about money? Why do they need the money? Do they need to take care of sick parents? Are they just greedy? But there's a factor just behind simply money. So when you think espionage and people do it for money, the first question I ask is, why money? What is it about money that helps them meet the needs that they want? So yeah, money. Aldrich Ames, classic example. He did it because he wanted to live a lavish life. In fact, that's how he got caught. When they were doing the investigation and the CI individuals were looking internal to the CIA, or the FBI was looking at the CIA, they saw Aldrich Ames drive up in a Jaguar. And they started pulling up some records. Wow, he lives in a multi-million-dollar house. How can he afford that? Undue affluence. You only make this much. How are you able to afford a lifestyle outside of what you're making? So a couple different terms. Undue affluence, that's how do you afford the lifestyle you currently live? That's an indicator of espionage. And again, what is it about money when I think money?
Well, in the Aldrich James case, because I think it's interesting, because I think he may have been a three married to a 10. And
That's
he
right.
he was using the money to really impress his wife. That's the impression that I got.
Yeah.
And maybe, it wasn't sick family members. It wasn't that he had a poor paying job. He wanted the money, not that he wanted to live the lavish lifestyle, but he wanted to impress his wife with that lifestyle, which is an interesting deal.
That's right. His wife wanted that lifestyle. She told him very plainly, I believe, that this is the lifestyle if I want. If you can't make it happen, then I'm leaving. And uh-oh. So what is it about money? I want to make sure I don't lose my wife or Alder James's case and rot in hell, you son of a bitch.
Absolutely. You never see the light of day.
That's right. You were spot on with ideology. I think that's the next big one. I look at cases like Ana Montes in Cuba. She didn't do it for money. She believed in what Cuba was doing. She was recently released, which is crazy to me. But she betrayed and stole secrets from the Defense Intelligence Agency as an analyst, was putting policy together and helped shaping U.S. policy to Cuba. Boy, the Cubans, let me tell you, they had a spy that was gold right there. They had somebody inside the inner networks of the government helping write policy that would be in favor of them. Ideology, plain and simple, they believe other values than what we currently have or a company currently has.
Yeah, it's such a great case. So glad you brought that up. And I've had conversations with Peter J. Lapp, and he's written wonderful books on it. This latest one, I think, is The Queen of Cuba. And there's a
Yeah.
lot to that case and a lot more that hasn't made it to news. But I would not recommend reaching out to Peter just to talk about this case, because he admittedly is tired of talking about it. And he said those words to me verbatim, like, please quit asking me about it. But he can't escape it. Fascinating case, Anna says.
Yeah, really interesting case. I would say the number three thing, and we kind of kicked it off just a couple minutes ago talking about what it was. And a honeypot. Honeypot to me is like a coercion, a coercion. So I think that third was coercion, blackmail. If you look back what the Soviet Union was doing to foreign diplomats overseas working in, I don't know, the Cold War type of era of former Soviet bloc countries, they would put individuals within the State Department and other intelligence agencies in compromising positions, drug them up, lay them down, put them next to prostitutes, blackmail them, saying, we're going to release this to your family if you don't work for us. That coercion. That's not a good way to do it, but boy, if you want to protect your marriage or protect your professional reputation, I understand it. I don't agree with it, but coercion, honeypots, or blackmail type of things with that.
Another, I totally missed that one. And now I know where you're going. There's an acronym. I totally missed
There is an acronym for this.
someone
That honeypot operation we talked about just a couple minutes ago too. It was Lone Tree. He was the individual, the Marine guy, that kind of met Uncle Sasha. Anyways, just thought about that. What's the third one then? If you look at the acronym.
Well, yeah, coercion. So that's the third one. The
Yeah,
fourth,
coercion. That's right. Yeah, that's right. The fourth one, ego.
ego. Yeah.
Also big. I look at like Robert Hanssen. He thought the mortician, he's called in the book that several books that I've written, that his coworkers called him the mortician. He was always looked down upon. He considers himself super smart, and he was a smart guy, rightfully so. But boy, he just thought he could outperform and outdupe everybody. He just thought, I'm going to get diamonds. I'm going to get this stuff, but I really want to do it because I am a master. I'm a master manipulator, and I'm just smarter than everybody in the room. Their ego gets in the way, and it's a motivation to commit espionage.
And he was a smart guy. And, of course, it's hard to believe everything that you see in news and media, and they've done some series on it. But I get the sense he is a real asshole too. But
Yeah.
that just might be the way that they portrayed him. But he was an asshole about it, and always thought he should have been higher than, I think, whenever he got caught. I think it was a GS-14, and he thought he should have been an SES or even higher. So, but yeah, smart guy.
Yeah. I hope he rots in hell too. He's farming his wife out to his buddy. I mean, good Lord, this guy's just mentally unstable. Clearly, I mean, you're committing espionage against the U.S. from the FBI. Disgusting.
And do you remember his alias that he used to initiate contact with the Russians? I don't remember the first name, but the last name was Garcia. And a lot of, he wrote his name was first name, whatever, doesn't matter, but last name was Garcia. And so, and he was always, in alias, whenever he was meeting with the Russians, he never gave them his true first name, because he was smart enough to understand that those lists get compromised. And when the Russians saw it, Garcia, they thought CIA, because the last three letters of his alias. And so, I mean, he was a smart guy, and he ran his own project, did his own tradecraft, initiated contact, set up the whole terms and everything else, still got caught.
You're always going to get caught no matter what you do. And now I just think with big data and technology, it's going to be harder for these assholes to do this, which I really appreciate. But that's a future episode, I suspect, Ryan.
I think it will be. So,
hey, kind of closing out espionage to our audience out there. If you want Ryan and I to kind of dissect any case out there or any espionage case, corporate, government, we'd love to dig into it for you.
Yeah, I love espionage. I'm a student of espionage. I don't think you could do this job without fully understanding the history and evolution of espionage over the years. So read.
That's right. Be a professional. And part of that is doing work outside the 9-to-5 job. This is a lifestyle. It's a profession. It's not 9 to 5. Yeah, Ryan, as I look at like what counterintelligence is, I think espionage, number one. Sabotage also falls up under that. So what do you think sabotage is? Putting you on the spot now.
It's a motivated destruction of something. And that something could be a lot of different things. It could be a physical target. It could be a network. It runs the gamut of just doing damage, destroying something that could negatively impact an organization's ability to get work done. Am I close?
Spot on, dude. Deliberate destruction of or damage of an object or thing. I mean, look what's happening in the news with these ships cutting the lines that go back and forth. It's probably sabotage. They're being deliberately cut. So anything, I really think, critical infrastructure site, whether it's a dam, whether it's these undersea cables, or a power plant, anything like that. And if something's attacked, I think that's a method of sabotage. I think that falls into what counterintelligence is trying to protect people, infrastructure, technology. Sabotage counter sabotage is what counterintelligence should be looking at. There's a whole bunch of cases out there as well, but I think sabotage, just to kind of mention a couple, during the World War II, there's plenty of acts of sabotage going on both sides, the Axis and the Allied side. So for the Allied side, the French would damage the rail lines from the Germans so that the Germans couldn't transport goods back and forth. That's an act of sabotage. Now, it was favorable on our side, and it was being done from the adversary side as well.
Yeah, and I mean, that's how the CIA got its start. And it was the Office of Strategic Services, and they intentionally hired people to go in and conduct sabotage operations behind enemy lines. And it was very effective. And it continued throughout the Cold War. Even though sabotage may have gone dormant, especially in the European theater, there were entire organizations that were dedicated to set up sabotage, or prepare for sabotage in the case of a major conflict between us and the Soviet Union. And so huge history of sabotage operations. And I have no doubt that the Soviet Union also were prepping for sabotage operations within the West and the United States, and had their clandestine officers prepping the battlefield just in case that kicked off.
Yeah, I'm sure that they were doing that. I don't think it's also it's a lot in times of conflict, but I look at 2001, the anthrax scares within the U.S., and anthrax was being distributed through our mailing system, our postal service system. You remember living that, Ryan? I'm like, oh my God, I don't even want to go check the mail, or I don't want anything because there could be a white powder on it. And that caused fear, doubt in our government. That's an act of sabotage. If you look at it that way, they used the postal system, these terrorists, to cause fear and doubt and shut down our infrastructure.
And we also saw just recently, we had internal organizations that were committing sabotage against our power grid. I think there was several cases in Washington State and North Carolina where unknown groups, but I don't think they've ever provided any additional information on who it was. But it might have been climate activists. It could have been anybody that came in and said, okay, we're going to take down this grid, and we're bombing and sabotaging power stations. So it doesn't even have to be a government organization. It could be anybody with an axe to grind.
Yeah, that's right. Environmental activists out there trying to prevent or shut down all these big companies doing things, at the power grid. That's a great reference, right? I look at the cyber domain. If you look what happened in 2010, the Stuxnet's worm attack, where it was probably an allied service, maybe us, the U.S., and a couple other entities out there in the Middle East attacking Iran to shut down their nuclear program. Right? That's a form of sabotage. We shut down, thankfully, their nuclear program with a worm attack, a cyber attack. So just not physical realm, but if you look at the cyber domain, the sabotages can be conducted there as well.
And we see this a lot in the corporate environment with denial of service attacks, where activists and maybe even nation states are attacking Verizon, the data centers of Verizon and Amazon, and just taking the system down. We saw this recently. Oh my gosh, I think it was in December of 2020, where they attacked SolarWinds, which was a huge organization that was designed for identity access management, and took a huge impact on the United States. So, yeah, it happens all the time. Sabotage is a very effective tool to affect change and cause pain.
Yeah, I think that's what it's meant for, unfortunately. But as counterintelligence professionals out there, we need to be aware of what it is, because most certainly it's going to impact what we're trying to protect: our people, our technology, and our infrastructure. Ryan, the third one, when I think counterintelligence, I think about like subversion, or kind of undermining or overthrowing governments with, whether true or fake information. We've seen that for years. I mean, good Lord. But subversion, when I think counterintelligence, that most certainly fits in what we're trying to prevent.
For sure. I mean, and it's an organized effort where you see, and yeah, I don't have a great example of what that looks like now, but I think we all feel it and know it whenever we see it. It's almost like uh, pornography. It's my finger on it, and yeah, I can't clearly define it, but I know it when I see it. And I think it
That's
was
right.
Justice Potter that came up with that saying. But you know, I think we all see it around us whenever it's happening. Do you have any specific examples of subversion, an active subversion?
I do a couple of different ones. So let me walk you through like 1917, and I think about the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia. Lenin comes to power, overthrows the Russian government to establish the Soviet Union. He did just that. He was an undermining or overthrowing of the government to take power, and he has hands on it for years to come. But I think 1917, the Bolshevik Revolution. Looking back at the Cambridge Five, a spy organizations in the 40s and 50s. In the UK, Russia hired individuals or recruited individuals to work in the UK to make distrust and try to take over and start like that communist type of environment. So I think about like the Cold War. Boy, the Soviet Union employed subversion quite a bit to kind of push their communist agenda. I mean, you can look at China with that right now, and then wanting to outreach and stretch their reach. Even bringing it back to something a little bit more recent, the Arab Spring, and through 2010 through 2012, and that rising that went all the way from Iraq through Africa.
No, yeah, all throughout the whole northern Africa region.
That's right. And I have one more example as well. Well, maybe two more that are internal to the U.S. 1970s Watergate. What was that? They tried to cover up the subversion of the democratic process and trying to affect the democratic process. They got caught, but it's a form of subversion. And then most recently, right, wrong, or indifferent, my personal opinion, the 2016 presidential elections, when it comes into the Russian disinformation campaign, Russia's trying to subvert or cause doubt within our society to better their interests, or just seed doubt so that they can gain a better influence. But I think 2016, the presidential election, was a form of subversion.
Yeah, all great examples and very effective in the way that it would played out. So, as counterintelligence professionals, understanding how governments are motivated to affect this change, and then they use propaganda, and
Yeah.
They used to say useful idiots and it is a real thing, and a lot of times it's driven by an intelligence organization to make that happen.
Yeah, that's right. As counterintelligence professionals, we need to be aware of what subversion is. There's probably a fourth category when I think about counterintelligence. It's that catch-all category. We can go to the old acronym SAIDA, subversion and espionage directed against the U.S. Army, and you can add in sedition, you can add in these other terms. But I like to couch in counterintelligence, at least for me, like all these other intelligence gathering things. So when I think counterintelligence, or when maybe our audience thinks about it, Ryan, I think we think about like the human domain, the physical domain. I look at what happened in World War II, what the Germans were employing. They were short on long-range artillery, and going up into Normandy along those bunkers, you know what they had in there? So as planes would fly over to catch the imagery, they didn't have enough artillery. They put telephone poles in there. Counter-emit. That is a form of counterintelligence. We're trying to deceive what's happening on the battlefield by making it look like they had artillery there when in fact they did not. When I think about like all those other intelligence disciplines, we think the human domain, it's emit, it's SIGINT, counter SIGINT, and trying to understand what's happening.
Yeah, it's everything that we have available to, or the other side has available to them. And I think about the intelligence collection cycle in many cases. And today, I think it's just as applicable as it was, 100 years ago, 500 years ago. I mean, you have open source and information that you can readily gather. There's technical intelligence and then human intelligence. And it's whatever the adversary could potentially use against you, you must defend against from a counterintelligence perspective.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, the ops cycle, boy, we should talk about that sometime too, right? That could be a whole nother episode. Maybe we'll add it on to our series. Well, Ryan, we're coming up on some time here. We wanted to keep this for our audience about 30 or 45 minutes between that time hack. I think we're getting pretty close, but we just talked about what counterintelligence is. Maybe what we could do with our next episode is why counterintelligence is important, how it's done. But before I do that, I think about like counterintelligence. What is it? It's really used to identify, exploit, and neutralize. Wow, IXN. But identify those particular threats that are trying to steal information or gain an operational advantage. That's how I would sum up what is counterintelligence. It's not just people, but it's technology and infrastructure.
Yeah, great definition. Great way to roll it up. So, Jeremy, this is episode 1, part 1 of our at least 9-part series. It may be 30 or 40 by the time we get finished.
That's right.
You want to set the table for some of the future discussions that we may have, and maybe like part 2, 3, 4. What are we? What can
I love it. What are we going to look at here next? We'll give everybody a little teaser. I think, Ryan, we should move into why is counterintelligence important. I look at Start With Why by Simon Sinek. And as professionals, we need to be able to sell counterintelligence out there. Nobody is more passionate about counterintelligence than counterintelligence professionals. However, oftentimes counterintelligence professionals are not in positions that make decisions up in the C-suites, or maybe within the government, but a lot of the government individuals are going to come from different backgrounds. So it's our ability to sell what counterintelligence is and why it needs to be invested in. I think we should talk about that. And maybe that same episode, maybe another one is, how is counterintelligence done? And we could sit down and talk about the 5 functions of counterintelligence. And then maybe, Ryan, before I hand it over to you, the current state of where we're at and how, this will probably be multiple episodes, how does technology changing the emerging landscape for corporate entities out there in the government? What do you think?
I think those are all great topics. And you're right. I mean, being able to sell counterintelligence to the executive level can be a challenge. Sometimes I'll say historically, we may have been our own worst enemy. There's been some counterintelligence things that have gone awry. I think those have been reined in the U.S. side, but we have a history that we're trying to overcome. And we have to demystify it. We have to call out bad actors whenever we see it, but also explain what's the value. Why should an executive invest in an overall counterintelligence program? And I think we've seen it both from the government standpoint. I know you and I have briefed multi-star generals in the past and said, hey, we need your approval to do this counterintelligence thing. And being able to put it into terms that, it makes sense to them. Like, yeah, I'm willing to take the risk for you to do this counterintelligence thing because the benefit outweighs the risk. Well, we have to be good at doing that on the corporate side as well, because they don't understand it. And so being able to talk to that corporate executive and saying, hey, it seems like it's going to be a risky thing by employing a defensive counterintelligence program within your organization, but here's the benefit and dollars and cents and impact for your business if you do employ this very great security discipline. And so we have to get there. I think we'll probably cover a lot of that over the course of our 9 or 10 or 20 part series that we're going to do. And then hopefully when we bring in guests, they reinforce the topics that we discuss.
Yeah, or of course correct us. Yeah, I'm excited to get some feedback. Please let us know. Ryan, I'm going to end with this, right? The ultimate goal of what counterintelligence is, it's preventing bad actors from gaining an advantage by exploiting or undermining your security posture. And that, I think, can be applied over the corporate and the government type of entity. If I was going to put on a bumper sticker, that's what I would say.
I love that bumper sticker. Maybe that's a revenue stream that we should pursue as bumper stickers.
I love it. If y'all want a bumper sticker, we'll get it made. Let us know.
Well, Jeremy, great first part of the series. I think we did a solid job defining counterintelligence. We've defined motivations and different categories that we should defend against. I think we're there. I think we set the scene.
Yeah, I think we're pretty good. For our audience out there, if you want to us to dig in a little bit deeper on any particular topic we've covered at any time, not just this episode, reach out, let us know.
All right, and that's a wrap for part one. Jeremy, always so great to talk with you, and I can't wait to get into part two.
Yeah, ditto, brother. I'm excited about it. Give us a like, follow us on LinkedIn, check out our website, www.ixnsolutions.com. If you want to talk counterintelligence, have any recommendations, questions, or concerns about what we talked about at any time, feel free to reach out to Ryan or I. Ryan is awesome.
Yep, awesome, Jeremy.